Hello and welcome to a City Voices interview with Dr. Nicole Gruel. Is that your proper pronoun?
Yes.
Oh, good. I pronounced Gruel correct?
Correct.
All right. So she is a doctor. Well, you're a doctor, right? You have a PhD.
Correct.
And it's in an interesting branch of psychology, right? Like
yeah,
an unusual branch of psychology.
A very unusual branch, transpersonal, which AKA spiritual psychology.
Tell us about where you got a degree in transpersonal psychology and about transpersonal psychology.
Sure. So you might have heard psychology's had these different kind of waves. So there was this like behavioral wave, and then it went to this humanistic wave. And even at the edges of that humanistic wave, they were saying, you know, there's still some things missing about kind of human potential and beyond that, right? And so that's where the transpersonal wave came in, because it was trying to understand and deal with matters beyond the personal, which is the transpersonal. So transpersonal really means beyond the personal as well as through the personal as well. And so it honors many different wisdom paths. It looks at different things like, you know, how do we understand spirituality and a spiritual being from different dimensions? So from the sciences, from the wisdom paths, from, you know, different ways that people walk the world in different cultures as well. So it's a very multidisciplinary kind of robust area, because that is what the human spirit is. Yeah.
And when did you discover that you could achieve such a degree?
When I came across the word transpersonal, I don't remember where I came across it, but I remember the moment I did, and I had one of those aha moments, Dan, where I was like, that's me. That describes my world. Transpersonal, that's what I've been doing the whole time. There's a word for what I do. So I got super excited, and once I discovered the word, I looked as far as I could in terms of where I could take my study of the transpersonal. And I'm in Australia, and Australia is very limited. It only went up to like a postgraduate level with that. But in America, over in California, that is the home of transpersonal psychology. So over at the Esalen Institute, which is that beautiful place over by the cliffs, a lot of the kind of who's who of the humanistic movement used to go and hang out there. So Abraham Maslow, I think, and maybe Joseph, well, not, I don't know if Maslow did, but Campbell. And so they used to go, and anyway, from there, and this movement was born, right? And so it was housed over in California, and you know, so that's where the institutions are that actually deal with this at a higher level. So there were two places I came across that where I could do a PhD in this, and that's what I did. So I started off at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which is now called Sophia University, and eventually shifted over to the California Institute of Integral Psychology.
And we're going backwards.
Sorry, Integral Studies, CIIS, yes.
We're going to go backwards. So we started at the degree, and now we're going backwards. You said you had started doing transpersonal work even before you discovered there was a degree for it. So tell us about the work.
Sure. So, well, there's the work and then there's the life. It's kind of, the work came because of who I was and my own experiences. And so maybe I should rewind to that. I've always had non-ordinary thoughts and experiences and interests. It's been a natural gravitation of mine. And I put that also, you know, related to my own family and background. And they were kind of like wandering hippies that traveled the world and just had amazing experiences. And the non-ordinary was pretty ordinary for them. So I grew up in a context where the non-ordinary was welcome. And there was no confined box around what, you know, my norm should really be. I was free to explore my own interests, as well as, you know, my mind was free to do what it wanted to do. And when I shared things about that, they weren't quashed. So I was exploring questions like, you know, is there a God and what do I believe when I was a young kid, because I just genuinely wanted to know. I wanted direction in these things. And my father, bless his soul, he's long passed on now, but he gave me one of the biggest blessing and curses of my life. He said, when I asked, what God do I believe? He said, anything you want to, darling. And, you know, here I was, a 7-year-old kid wanting structure and direction. Give me the answer. And of course, he gave me the open road, which is beautiful. So that prompted my quest, my spiritual quest. And that took me down many roads of, you know, yoga was one of my biggest pathways that I really gravitated to, but also animism and kind of shamanistic pathways, because I have a Japanese background and they are an animist type culture who believe that there's life force energy in the rocks, in the wind, in everything, and we can interact with the natural world that way, kind of that spirits are everywhere. And so I just had an interest in all of it. And then in addition to that, I had some pretty wild spiritual experiences. So I had a near-death experience when I was 14 years old, and I was whitewater rafting and the boat tipped over and I got thrown out of the boat and I drowned. I went deep underwater. Everything was black and I didn't know which way I should swim, up, down, left or right. And I was a very strong swimmer, so I would have been able to swim if I knew the direction, but I didn't know where to go. So in that moment of just being surrounded by all black water, I knew I was on my last breath and I had a moment of sheer panic. And then straight after that, I had a moment of everything just went calm and still. And in that black water opened up a horizon of light. And from that horizon of light came towards me my then living grandmother, so my Japanese side, so she's a samurai woman, my Japanese grandmother, and my then deceased first pet dog. And so I was 14 years old at the time, and I just thought, oh, this is unusual. What are you doing here? And then I heard a male voice right next to my head that said, Nicole, remember to breathe. And with that came the recollection of, oh, I have to curl up like a ball. And I popped to like a cork, right? Because we have these safety jackets on. I popped to the top and then came up and took my breath, and the world was right again, right? And I was only 14, so I didn't make any big deal about that. I was like, oh, I'm alive, cool, next adventure, right? And off we went. And so like there's a difference, as I'm sure you know, Dan, with kids who have spiritual experiences and adults. And that's one area we could dive into, because it is interesting. And that's really related to what paradigms have we created in our minds about how the world is supposed to work, right?
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. You know, the experience of a child having a spiritual experience compared to an adult, and how the two process these things differently.
They do. So we'll come back. I'll finish off the train of the individual, of the personal experience into the work. And so those experiences happened, and numerous other spiritual experiences along the way, that, like some of the big ones, you know, that kind of dissolve self, and the big aha moments that change everything. There were several of those, as well as lots of little ones. Yeah. So I call my experiences big bangs that happened with like lots of little it's a whole constellation. There's lots of little stars, but it's an overall picture. And so by the time I got to, I don't know, my somewhere in my 20s, I knew that I loved working with people, and I loved people's stories. More than anything, I love people's stories. And I was always one of those people where I'd just meet a stranger, or people would come to me and they'd bare their soul, and they'd sit there and say, I don't know why I'm telling you all of these things, right? But I am. So I love those conversations, and often people's spiritual content would come out. So for me in my professional journey, that led me naturally into counseling and then coaching, and here we are today, is helping people pull out their stories of their experiences, so that we can then pull out the gems of those and the gifts of those and say, cool, what now? You know, what do you want to do with all of that?
Okay, and you may know that City Voices is our constituents are people with serious mental health diagnoses. So let's say someone came to you and shared their experience, you know, in an altered state, which the psychiatrist calls psychosis.
Yeah.
And it's just a very unusual story, because it's a reality that was individual to that person who came to you. And how would you help? Well, how would you help them to help themselves?
Yeah, you know, so I work with some clients who do come and they have mental health diagnoses. Some people are on medication, some people are coming off medication. And so, you know, and given the population I work with are folks who have had spiritual experiences. So when I meet folks who have had a diagnosis.
Oh, before you go on, what's the
Yeah.
difference between a spiritual experience and what is labeled psychosis?
Oh, it's such a gray line. It's such a gray line. And even the world of science is not definitive on it. So this is, you know, this is a very controversial area, I think, because, you know, in the DSM, right, which is the little manual that they use for all these fancy terms and names that, you know, can get applied to people for life. In that book, there's only one tiny little section at the very end that talks about something called, I think it's spiritual problems is the terminology of that. And when you read that little section that's at the end, it doesn't even go very far into helping the practitioner understand what on earth is going on. So it's vague within even a kind of definition. And look, and the DSM itself is very controversial too in its own history and modern psychiatry, and, you know, how that book has come about. So that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down, right? So you know, my understanding is that there is no fixed line to say on one side, you know, this is a mental health issue, and on the other side, it is strictly a mental health issue and it has nothing to do with a spiritual issue, or it's strictly a spiritual issue and has nothing to do with mental health issue, right? I don't think there's any, I've not come across any clear line in the sand, and I don't think there is one to my understanding. It is very fuzzy.
Well, let me tell you what I'm sorry. Joseph Campbell, you mentioned him earlier. He has a famous quote as saying, the psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with glee. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we go into those same waters, I mean, we're talking the psycho-spiritual realms, right? These are the waters that are on there. And so that's such a great quote, because it's more than about what is the experiencer's experience of being in that water. Are you sinking or are you swimming with glee, right? And so for me, the indicators are, if I'm working with somebody who has self-identified with some issues going on, and even if they haven't self-identified, there are some clear signs for me. One is that person of harm to themselves, and are they of harm to other people? This is just a very standard, you know, a standard layer that is used in counseling, in coaching, and in the mental health industry. Now, having worked with experiencers who have been through the mental health system, some of them signed their self up and some of them got put into the system against their will, right? But all of them who come to me to work together had some layer of spiritual content that was going through their experience. And that's why they come and work together, because they still have this question of, okay, so I've had the mental health conversations over here, which may or may not have helped me, right? And I'm not saying they're not helpful for everyone. They are helpful for some people, right? So they may or may not have helped me, but I'm still dealing with this spiritual stuff. There's still stuff in my soul that feels unresolved. How can I work through that? How can I understand the stories? And so, of course, that's not the regular thing in a 15-minute session in a psychiatrist's office that you're necessarily going to have time to deal with, right? Nor are you necessarily going to be able to entertain the certain voices that come through and tell you things, certain characters that come through, certain visions that you're having, right? So to the degree that these experiences completely take over your psyche, and you lose contact with your ability to function in the day-to-day, right? Your ability to discern between I'm having an experience, right? You're witnessing that I'm having an experience, or you're just completely in the experience, right? That's about the closest I think we can get to drawing that line, right? Is your experience completely consuming you, or are you able to understand and discern that I'm having an experience? Yeah. So often the people that come and say, am I crazy, are the ones where I'm saying, well, because you're asking that question, I'm likely to say no. Because you're asking the question. Who's asking that question, right? Someone who is witnessing an experience that goes on. So it's such a broad area, Dan, and I don't think it's helpful for anybody who has experiences beyond what we deem as normal or ordinary to simply label them as having a pathological experience. I don't think that's helpful at all, because what happens is we miss the magic of what's going on. We miss some of the importance of the message and the content that's in there. But we have to help the experiencer. If that content has become overwhelming to them, then that person needs a safe space. They need a safe space where, you know, if your experience is on that side of the spectrum, which is called a spiritual emergency, which really is that time where all the content takes over, you have likely lost your ability to, you know, deal with the basic day-to-day stuff like food, shelter, you know, job, forget that kind of stuff, right? The day-to-day becomes very, very difficult when someone is in a spiritual emergency. In that place, we need people to have a really safe space where they can be heard, where their basic needs can be taken care of, and where they can have the time for their content to move through them. Yeah, and I just don't think modern psychology and psychiatry is prepared to help people through these experiences, nor is the traditional spiritual setting. I used to go to an ashram, and I heard that at that ashram, I asked them this question, this was decades ago, and I was like, well, what do you do with people when they go through, I didn't use the term a psychotic state, but it was in that same frame of when someone's experiences just take them over and, you know, and they don't know what to do in that moment. They're so intense. Apparently in the 70s, they used to have a hole dug into the ground, and they would just put the person in the hole and leave them in that hole for like 3 days or so and bring them food to make sure that they were still going, food and water, but they would just like play out the experience. Now, I don't think that approach is very helpful either, right? So where are we in the modern day? I think we know enough in the transpersonal field to understand that these experiences have value. They're important, and we can help people move through that. We know that we can help people move through them. And not just in the transpersonal movement, in terms of, you know, even quantum physics, right? Where we're understanding energy.
Well, let's not get too cerebral about it. Let me ask you, what is the most challenging aspect of an overwhelming spiritual experience that you seek to help people? I have my own ideas about what, you know, emotionally, what spiritually, emotionally, what are the biggest challenges that people must deal with if they're going to move forward with their lives and experiences?
Well, grounding is the biggest piece. How can you ground your experiences? That's the goal at the end of the day, right? Regardless of what the experience is and what the content is, how can you ground it? And so it becomes very non-spiritual in that sense. It's like, are you eating good food? Are you sleeping? Are you exercising? Like some of just the most fundamental basics in how we can regulate our being.
Let me rephrase.
Yes.
Tremendous fear. That sometimes a psychiatrist will call it paranoia, because that fear could be projected into the car that's parked on the street. Is that someone who's coming after me? Looking through the shades, you know, because you're feeling like you're in danger. There's threats all around you, or even just a fear that has no projection. It's just an overwhelming sensation of I'm not safe here. Or death is pending, death is looming, you know. So that emotion, fear, is probably one of those emotions that can be extremely challenging for the person experiencing it, especially if it won't go away so easily, and those who seek to help them or guide them.
And so what was the question around the big emotions? Sorry, Dan.
So the question is, have you ever experienced personally a tremendous amount of fear that would enable you to empathize with your clients who are presently experiencing that? And how do you help them through the fear?
So have I ever experienced a fear that is so tremendous like that? I would point to two moments through my spiritual experiences where I thought I was going to die. I mean, I don't know what greater fear there is than my life's about to end. So one is that one I mentioned previously of this is my last breath, and the sheer terror that was in that split moment, followed by the calm. And a second time where also a spiritual experience, which I would call a near-death-like experience, where I felt layers of myself peeling off like an onion and dissolving, but it wasn't pleasant. It was like the layers were being ripped off, and I was desperately grasping to each layer. Like one layer being, my name is Nicole. Whoosh, that got ripped off. I am woman. Whoosh, that got ripped off, right? Anything I could identify with in terms of who I am just got ripped off in this process that happened over 3 days. I was going in and out of ordinary and non-ordinary states of consciousness spontaneously. And at the end of that, and that was terrifying because I didn't know what was going to happen. And it just kept going, and it was like the process had taken over me. I could not control this thing, right? This was happening to me. And at the end of it, all that was left was a pinprick of light. That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. So they both resolved those experiences after going through the fear. They naturally came to a point of resolution. But
what does it mean to go through the fear? What does that mean? I know so much of this experience cannot be put into words or easily pictured, but see what you can do with it.
Yeah, well, I'd liken it to a woman giving birth to a baby. It's like there's a baby there, and eventually the baby's going to have to come out. And so the only way through that process is to keep on breathing, no matter what kind of pain and challenge and delight and excitement. And like a woman experiences 1,000 emotions in that journey, which is quite a long journey, you know, to get that child out. Time completely slows down so that things can happen. But the only way through it is to keep on breathing and to keep on moving, knowing that it's going somewhere, because there is a natural process taking place. And I think it's really similar. I know that that's like a physical experience, but it's also an emotional one that happens. And I think this is the same thing with many of our emotional processes, whether it be fear, whether it be anxiety, right? Whether it be depression. These are emotion, energy in motion. And so there's something about being with the energy of that thing, right? The fear, the anxiety, the depression, whatever it is, and knowing that it's an energy that it's in motion, it's moving through, something's happening with it, right? And the breath is a powerful tool. I mean, as long as we're alive, that's how we know we're alive, right? Because we just keep breathing. So that's this one thing that we have that can keep us moving through this time period and helping the motion of the energy, the emotion move through. So when you ask, Dan, how do I work with people through their emotions? The first thing is to acknowledge the emotion. you know, okay, it's there. We're not going to deny it. We're not going to suppress it. And so we acknowledge it, and then we begin to understand it, like almost though, this is one of the things I love doing with clients, like it's like going on a date with the emotion. Like, let's get to know this entity. Does it have a name, a shape, a color? Sometimes the most ridiculous images come out from this thing, right? And they grow and they morph. And as much as you okay?
Yeah, we were experiencing some lag with the video. Are you experiencing any lag from my video?
It's okay.
Okay, it got better, but for a moment you were like frozen. It was
Oh, okay.
So
I can rewind a bit.
Yeah, rewind like 2 minutes.
Oh, wow, I don't have the time,
1 minute, 1 minute.
Okay, we were talking how to work with the emotions, so I'll go with that again. So the first piece is, at least in how I approach them, is to acknowledge the emotion, right? Acknowledge that it's there. And then the second part is to start to get to know it. And so, you know, getting to know it like it's another person, right? And if you want to put a fun element on what doesn't feel like fun, like those big emotions of fear and anxiety and depression, these are the typical big ones, right? They're not fun at all when we experience them, but how can we bring an element of kind of lightness to these heavy states, right? So that's how I like to work with people. And I'm not making light of them in that sense, not at all. I'm taking these things very seriously, but I'm meeting them in a way where, you know, if the work is always so heavy, dull and harsh, we have a bit of an aversion to doing it, right? But if we can kind of step into something going, okay, I understand that there's a process and it's a bit uncomfortable and I don't quite like it, but if I can like wear a clown suit while I'm in a war zone, that kind of lightens things up a little bit. We're all aware we're in a war zone, but we're wearing a clown suit, right? Something like that. So, you know, how can we meet these emotions? And I think of Rumi's poem at this stage, The Guest House, right? Maybe that's, you know, you can share it with your listeners because it's a bit longer. But the essence of it is Rumi talks about a guest house and all of these things that we experience in our life, to welcome them into the guest house, because you know, we don't know what delights or surprises they might bring, no matter how sorrowful or hard they might be as well. If we don't welcome them into the guest house, we'll never know. And it's part of the wholeness of human experience. So I welcome all emotions that are there, particularly the big ones, because they have so much to reveal to us about our own energy. And they're just patterns. They're just patterns that we've morphed into over time, or maybe we've learnt when we were a kid that this was, you know, a pattern that was safe, that we could go to, and it's just kind of, you know, it's no longer helpful to us anymore, right? So it's a matter of getting to know it. And this is part of how we carry through, and over time, these emotions, when you're with them, when you're with the energy, naturally, this is the wisdom of nature that is in us. Naturally, when you give them attention and feed them like a garden, they morph and they change over time. And then they become very interesting. What's under that emotion? What emotion is that emotion connected to? And they shift and change. And so it's a journey that we can go to. And in that journey, we learn more about ourselves. And we also learn to regulate these things when they happen and to be with them more.
Right, it's like the famous Buddhist monk Pema Chodron. She said, "We are the everlasting sky. Everything else is just the weather." Yeah. But sometimes, you know, I know from working with my peers and the constituents who follow us, people with diagnoses often complain and are suffering because these emotions are getting trapped in their bodies and causing so much pain, physical, mental, all kinds of pain. And how do you help someone to flow and release trapped emotions?
It's interesting because my understanding of some psychiatric medications is that they have the ability to block and suppress emotions, right? And so it's very hard to work with emotions when you're fighting some other force in the body that's trying to suppress them, right? So again, it would be the kind of process that I'm talking about there, which is about acknowledging that those things are there. Now, when people are going through pain, physical pain, right, this is a different kind of approach, because if it's on a physical level and you have chronic pain, there are things that you need to do to address that, right? And so this gets so personal and individual, it's hard to give general statements on this stuff, but it is essential that you acknowledge your physical pain and you start to look at some wholesome, avenues of how to address it and deal with it. So if you're doing things that are working well for you, then good, carry on with that. But if you've come to a stuck point where you're trying to fix, a painful situation, and the way that you're going about it, or the way that the system is telling you to go about it, is you don't find it helpful, then it's okay to ask the question, is there a different way? Is there a different way I could be approaching this?
A way that is very common in our community is just to power through. And at the other extreme, to sleep it off. And I don't think either one of those is like long-term beneficial.
And that's a really important point, so we have to look at what's beneficial in the short term and what's beneficial in the long term. And a great overall approach would be one that can hopefully address both of those, right? Yeah, I mean, sometimes we do have to push through certain things. That's okay, but if we do it all the time, what then happens, right? And do we actually do ourselves a disservice? So in any of those moments where we see ourselves doing anything that eventually is going to be a disservice, that's just one of those little flag moments where we can say, okay, how could I do this more gently, more lovingly for myself, where I can address what I need to in the moment as well as possible, but I'm also taking care of myself into the future.
So you mentioned how psychiatric medications could be something that suppresses emotions. And I love the fact that I didn't know emotions were energy in motion. Is that really what emotions, is that the scientific definition, or is that something you made up?
It is. I think it's something I came across a very long time ago.
Oh.
I can't tell you where, but yeah, we are energy. I mean, that's
Right.
what we are. We're systems of energy, right? And
so let me ask you.
Yes.
So then you have these medications that are suppressing the energy from moving in and out of our bodies and our minds and what have you, in our souls. How do you work with someone who says, listen, I don't think you can help me because I'm on these medications, and your techniques are to feel these emotions, but I'm like dead inside.
Well, look, if anyone says, I don't think you can help me or work with me, then I say, cool, no problems. I mean, I'm not going to push or strain any kind of relationship. It's always up to the person and what's working for them. So that's fine. But if someone's saying, look, I'm dead inside and I want to feel more alive, then the conversation I would have with them is about, and in your deepest wisdom, what do you think needs to shift in your life in order to make that happen? We need to understand what that person really wants. And if their deep desire is to feel more alive and to feel more of the emotions, then good. At least you know that much. So then the next bit is how? What needs to shift, right? The hows that can happen. So again, so many of these conversations are for the individual, right? In the individual's circumstance, and we can't put a blanket approach on things. And I think that's one of the challenges and even errors of modern medicine, is this one size fits all kind of approach. And, you know, if things aren't getting better and if you're not being more functional and productive as the way a certain world, you know, deems to be correct, well, we'll just shift it or add on more of something else and course correct in a different way and keep experimenting, you know. Now, look, again, it's gonna work for some people and it's gonna be a disaster for other people.
Right. What if
Yeah.
someone asked you, what if someone said, listen, you know, I believe in your techniques and I think I can be even more, you can be even more benefit to me if I felt more my emotions. So I've decided that I am going to start weaning off of my psychiatric meds, and will you support me in that endeavor, and how will you support me?
Yeah, I mean, I will support people in whatever pathway they want to pursue if they understand that it's for their greater benefit, right? For themselves, and they're of no harm to themselves or others. But I am not a psychiatrist. And so any changes to someone's own pathway where they've already got medications going on, they're going to have to consult, you know, with their practitioners for their own safety. Though I know there are people that, you know, just go off them and have another journey that way, you know. So that's not my area, and I will never, you know, say to someone, go and do this pathway if I think they're going to be of harm to themselves or other people, you know. So it really, I trust at the end of the day, the part I trust the deepest is the inner knowing of that other person. I believe fundamentally we each know deep within our being what is in our best interest and what is in how we can live our best lives. I think all that information is deeply wired into us, but we lose contact with it, right? And so my job is to simply help someone reconnect with that inside themselves. What is your greatest wisdom? Yeah.
To help them become their own gurus. To
help them live their happiest life. You know?
Right, and
yeah.
like a guru relationship, the guru, I think guru literally means like shedding light or something like that in Hindi. Like they're just like a lighthouse to someone who might be lost. And if you can help people to awaken their inner light, then that could be, they could use that light and as a guiding force in their lives, right?
Yeah, their inner light and their inner wisdom so that they can make good decisions. Yeah, but, you know, helping people connect to that is also a process. And if we have become very disconnected from it, and that's not a fault of the individual, we are raised in a society that disconnects us from things like our inner knowing, our inner, you know, our intuition, our deep wisdom. Our spiritual essence. We don't learn this stuff in school, right? You don't sit down and have classes in this stuff. And so we're not taught to have that connection. So if you get to adulthood and you feel very disconnected from your emotions, from your light, from your essence, from your intuition, all of these things, you know, you don't need to go beating yourself with a stick saying, oh, and punish yourself even more, right? Because that's not going to help either. So it's okay to acknowledge that we can easily become disconnected from these things. And the invitation then is to reconnect with them so that we can make more empowered decisions. Our power can come from within. But on that journey to connecting to that powerful place and becoming more empowered, it's also okay to have support along the way, to have a team along the way, to have a community. This is when it becomes important to connect with a group of people, a tribe of people who you relate with and understand your story, so we can support each other through that. As you say, your peers, right? We need each other through this. We're not meant to, you know, operate as just these individual little entities either. So it's interconnected there. And I think some people also then feel I have to do it all on my own. And that can be so true of this modern world that's very individualistic. You know, me, I have to, like you say, you just got to push through, right, and do it on your own. Yes, we have to learn how to be resilient and, you know, grow our inner power. but we also don't have to do it alone. You know, we can soften, we can fall into the arms of others, we can fall into the arms of grace, we can be held at times as well. Yeah.
That's beautifully put. All right. Well, I hear there's some workers in the background, I hear. Am I right? Am I hearing that correctly?
There's a little bit there. Yeah, it might increase over time. Yeah, please excuse us if it does.
Well, we can wrap up, and I would like you to, if there's something in your heart that you want to communicate to our listeners, please do right now.
Yeah, there were 3 things actually, Dan. There's 2 in my head, and then I'll do one from my heart, if that's okay.
Okay.
One was from before, the point that we touched on about the difference with adult and child experiences. I just wanted to honor that popped up in there. And all I wanted to say about that is that, you know, if you have spiritual experiences as a child, our idea about the world and how it works and operate, it's not as defined at that point. It's not as well formed. And so we have the ability as children to just take things in more and accept them as they are. But as we grow into being these big adults, and we get socialized and we go through school and all the rest of it, then we can get really fixed in terms of this is how the world's supposed to work and how it's supposed to operate. And so if you have a non-ordinary experience now as an adult, now we can have a lot more challenges, because our regular mind is going, that was kind of mind-blowing, right? That was beyond my mind. And so now the integration process is quite different for an adult. So just to acknowledge that. The second mind piece I wanted to share was, you know, as I was feeling into this conversation, Dan, with you, there was one really important piece I want to share with your community. And I put it in my book, which I'll give you the link. You guys can download this for free as a PDF. You can get it from me as a hard copy, purchase it if you want, but you can download it for free. But in the book is one little chapter on neuroscience. And there's this one thing called the entropic brain theory. And this is where I think this conversation on expanded states of consciousness, right, come in with spirituality and mental health experiences along the way. This theory is that, like in entropy, things fall apart, right? And it says that on this scale, at one end, there's like a lot of entropy. And at the other end, it's like really tight. And our normal mode of operating sits kind of in a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. We're not too rigid and like uptight and anxious about everything. And we're also not too loose and apart and all over the place. But we kind of sit in this happy medium and we move, right, along it. Now, what happens as we tip towards these entropic states, at that edge, I'll read you some of the things that are there. We have what have we got? Psychedelic states. We have infant consciousness, REM sleep and dreaming, early psychosis, sensory deprivation, near-death experiences, magical thinking, dreamy states, and creativity. So when we talk, this brings it back to the waters that you were talking about, that, you know, the mystic and the madman swim in. Those are the waters right there. And what I think is so important to acknowledge is that we humans all have the ability to contact those states. There's nothing abnormal and there's nothing pathological about them. We're designed to be able to access them, right? That's important, so that people don't feel like, you know, there's something wrong with me if I'm having some of these states. That is a societal structure that is telling us what is right and wrong. Yeah. So it's not. They're accessible. So that's something that your listeners might like to hear about. From the heart, gosh, this human experience is wild. It's wild. The fact that we can come into a physical form, that consciousness can come into a physical form and have an experience. And this experience while we're in this human body could be absolutely anything, right? That's wild in itself. And you, me, we have an opportunity while we're in this form to use our will, to use, you know, that magnetic thing that we have to lean into certain experiences. And we can be like a magnet. There are things that we're going to want to lean into, and there are going to be things that we're repelled from. None of this is good or bad. None of it is evil or light. They are experiences that we can have, and it's all okay. And so it is the mystery of being human. The mystery of being human, yeah.
Don't fear the mystery, right?
Yeah.
Embrace the mystery.
Embrace it to the best of your ability. Embrace it and, you know, take it on as like a curious adventure. Okay, I'm having experiences. Right. And get out your magnifying glass and kind of, what is this experience all about, you know? Get curious about the things that are happening to you, because you're human and you have this divine design. You have the capacity to experience and do so many different things, and you get some choices in that. You get some really powerful choices in terms of what you want to experience. And so it's okay to claim that and say, this is what I want for me in my life. You know,
to benefit most from those unexplained experiences that bring us so close to the mystery.
Yeah.
Is it best not to have that inner voice commenting and saying, oh, wow, this is what that is, or this is what we're going through. Oh, I'll remember that. Or should it be, should we strive for experiencing the mystery in silence?
Oh, no, we're all built different ways. You don't have to be silent. No. And I mean, when you say that little voice inside, I mean, what is the quality of that little voice? There might be numerous, right? Is it a critic? Is it a champion? Is it a like how do we talk to ourselves, right? How do we dialogue internally with ourselves? The quality of that conversation is interesting, right? And the quality of that conversation matters. If the bulk of that conversation is depressing, is pushing your spirit down, right, is harsh and critical, be like a fly on the wall and just listen to the conversation and get curious about it, right? What is the nature of that conversation, and is it helpful to me? Is it helpful in this moment? If it's not helpful, okay, make some different choices. This might not be in your best interest. And if that voice is stubborn on the inside, you can be like, thank you very much, and that is not useful at this time. I'm going to make a different choice. I hear you, I acknowledge you, and I'm going to choose differently for me right now. It's okay to do that. It's okay to be with the dialogue and to make it a more empowering one. Yeah.
In the 9 minutes we have left, I want to ask you about love and what role love should be playing in our lives as a healing energy, when so often so many of the people I come across are so disconnected from love, but are so connected to that harsh critic that you mentioned. Not the loving voice, but the critical one. How do we find that love and that loving voice and that support, that inner support, that inner energy, the feeling, the glow, the light, and the voice that comes with it?
Yeah. What role should love play? A massive one. A massive one. Because love and healing go hand in hand, right? When you think of a child that comes into the world, Dan, all it needs is love. That's all that precious being needs to survive. It needs, you know, a bit of breast milk or water or food, you know, it needs those things too, but it needs love. Now, why does that have to stop when we're big people? It doesn't, nor should it, right? And this is a world that can be so harsh and so loveless and so isolating. So, yet again, make a powerful choice. If your life has become like a desert parched of love and you don't see an ounce of it anywhere, right? Make a powerful choice. I choose to live a life that invites in love. I choose to live a life that is immersed in love. I choose to live a life that welcomes love. I choose to have my eyes opened to what love might be, right? We have to find a crack somewhere in us that actually wants to let that in. Like Leonard Cohen says, right? You know, you got to have that crack to let the light in, right? So it's okay to not always have to push through, like you say, and be this strong armored thing. And I get that a lot of the time we do that in terms of surviving in the world. We have a strong armor, right? And so when you're so armored up and you're so used to defending yourself, it can be really, really hard to acknowledge the tiny little crack that, you know, if you acknowledge that crack and you get soft in that space, the whole thing could melt, right? Because really deep down, we're armored up because underneath we just need the love and we're very soft under it. So we are all built to be able to receive and to give love. That's, again, part of our hard wiring. It was the first thing that happened when we popped into this planet, yeah? So the good thing is you already have it within you. If you feel like there's no love in your life, you already have that capacity within you. That's there. So that now it's about the choice to engage with that more, the choice to let it in more. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much. I will end the recording.